There are moments in life that slip quietly into your world, unnoticed at first until they bloom into something you can't ignore. They don't come with warnings or thunder. They arrive softly, like a whisper in the dark, and yet somehow they change everything. My name is Lauren. I'm a mother, a wife, and a woman who thought she understood what love meant. I've lived through the warmth of affection, the ache of loss, and the quiet comfort of ordinary days. But nothing prepared me for Ethan, my stepson. When I married his father, David, I expected the usual awkwardness of blending two families. I never imagined I would one day feel something I couldn't name, something I wasn't supposed to feel. Ethan was always different, though not in a way anyone would notice. He was respectful, kind, and carried a softness in his voice that made people trust him. In the beginning, I saw him simply as my husband's son, a young boy finding his place in a new home. But as years passed, the air between us began to change slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. It started with glances, those fleeting moments when our eyes met a second too long. When he smiled, something unexplainable stirred inside me, something I brushed off as maternal affection. But then one evening, I caught him looking at me differently. It wasn't the gaze of a child anymore. It was the look of a man trying to understand something he shouldn't feel. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just loneliness talking. David was away most weeks for work, and the house often felt too big, too quiet. Ethan and I shared dinners, talked about small things, and filled the silence with laughter that felt harmless until it didn't. One evening, it all began to shift. The rain outside was steady, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat. I was reading on the couch. He was sitting nearby, flipping through channels. The living room felt wrapped in a strange kind of stillness, as if the air itself was holding its breath. When I looked up, his eyes were already on me. "Mom," he said softly. The word came out hesitant, trembling, but it didn't sound like it used to. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. I lowered my book. "What is it, Ethan?" He hesitated, looking down for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "I've been thinking about something about us." The room suddenly felt smaller. My pulse quickened. I wanted to say don't to stop him before he said whatever was coming, but my voice wouldn't move. "I know this sounds crazy," he continued, his voice shaking, "but I feel like there's something between us, something I can't ignore anymore." I stared at him, frozen. The words hit me like a wave, washing away every lie I'd told myself. "Ethan," I whispered, my throat tight. "This isn't right. You're my stepson. We can't." He interrupted gently, his voice desperate but calm. "I know what it means. I know how wrong it sounds, but I can't stop how I feel. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed to know if you feel it too. Silence. It's just the rain and our breathing." I should have said no. I should have stood up, left the room, done anything but stay. But I didn't because deep down I knew whatever this was, it wasn't one-sided. I felt it too. That pull, that warmth, that dangerous, quiet electricity that made every moment with him feel like standing too close to fire. For a long moment, we just sat there, him waiting, me breaking. The air between us throbbed with words unspoken. And then I finally found enough strength to whisper, "Ethan, please stop. This could ruin everything." He didn't move. He just looked at me, his eyes full of confusion, pain, and something else. Something that terrified me because I recognized it. That night, nothing happened. No touch, no kiss, only silence. But that silence said everything we couldn't. And from that moment on, nothing between us was ever the same again. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains like nothing had changed. The house looked the same, quiet, ordinary, safe, but every breath I took reminded me that everything inside me was different. I moved through the motions of the day as if pretending could erase what happened. Ethan came downstairs for breakfast, his hair still damp from the shower, his shirt clinging slightly to his shoulders. I smiled, maybe too quickly, maybe too politely. He smiled back, and for a heartbeat, the world stilled. That same unspoken tension hung between us, soft, fragile, and wrong. I set his plate on the table. "Eat before it gets cold." "Thanks," he said, his voice gentle. We didn't talk much. Only the sound of cutlery filled the space, a rhythm that felt louder than it should. Every time I looked up, I caught him glancing at me. Not staring, not obvious, but enough to make my heart stumble. After he left for class, I sat at the table long after he was gone, staring at the empty chair. I told myself to stop thinking, to stop feeling, but my mind refused to listen. I could still hear his voice from last night echoing inside me. "I just needed to know if you feel it too." By evening, David called. His business trip was going longer than expected. He'd be back next week. His voice was tired but kind. I said I missed him, and I meant it. At least part of me did. The other part, the one I didn't want to acknowledge, was relieved. Relieved that I wouldn't have to face the truth with both of them under the same roof. Days passed in slow motion. Ethan came and went. We talked about normal things, grocery lists, his upcoming exams, the movie he wanted to see. Everything looked innocent from the outside, but the quiet between us said otherwise. The air carried memories neither of us could erase. One night, I walked past his room. The door was slightly open, and I saw him sitting on his bed, guitar in hand, his head bent low. His music was soft, uncertain, almost trembling. I stood there hidden, listening to the melody pour out of him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, raw in a way that pulled at something deep inside me. He looked up suddenly and saw me. Our eyes met. He didn't stop playing. Instead, he smiled faintly and whispered, "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," I said, my voice lower than I expected. "It's beautiful." He set the guitar down and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I wrote it last night," he said. "Couldn't sleep." The air shifted again, heavy close. I should have walked away, but my feet didn't move. "What's it called?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "The Line We Don't Cross." The words hit me straight in the chest. For a second, I couldn't breathe. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's just a song," he added quickly, forcing a small laugh. But we both knew it wasn't just a song. It was everything we hadn't said, every emotion we'd buried, every truth we were running from. I left before I could say something foolish. Back in my room, I closed the door and leaned against it, shaking. I told myself again and again, this has to stop. Whatever this is, it can't exist. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, the wind, the clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, made my pulse race. When I finally drifted into half-sleep, I dreamed of him standing in that same quiet light, eyes full of questions I couldn't answer. When I woke, it was still dark. The house was silent, and in that silence, I knew pretending wasn't going to save us. The days after that night blurred into one long stretch of silence and stolen glances. Every word between us carried weight. Every moment carried a memory we didn't want to admit existed. On the surface, everything looked normal. Breakfast together, short conversations, polite smiles. But underneath, a storm was quietly breathing. Ethan stopped saying much. He still helped around the house, still asked about my day, still offered that quiet kindness I had always admired. But now, his eyes carried something heavier. A question that never left his lips. And maybe that's what hurt the most, the silence. Because in that silence, I felt everything. One afternoon, I found him in the backyard fixing the garden lights. The sun was low, painting gold across his skin. He looked older, calmer, and yet I could see the exhaustion in his face. The kind that comes from holding back too much for too long. I brought him a glass of water. "You've been out here for hours," I said softly. He looked up and smiled. "Just wanted to keep busy." I watched him sip the water. The simple motion somehow so human, so fragile. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. "Lauren," he said suddenly, setting the glass down. "Can I ask you something?" I hesitated. Of course, he looked at me, eyes searching, cautious. "Do you ever wish things were different?" The words felt like glass against my chest. I wanted to answer, to say yes, to admit the ache that lived inside me every time I thought of him. But I couldn't. Some truths once spoken destroy everything they touch. I think I whispered, choosing each word carefully. "We don't always get to choose what we feel, but we do get to choose what we do with it." He nodded slowly, like he already knew my answer. "That's what I thought, Dot." We stood there for a long time, the air between us heavy with everything left unsaid. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, sweet, haunting, and fleeting. When he turned to leave, I almost reached out. My hand lifted halfway, trembling in the air before I forced it back down. He didn't see, or maybe he did. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark window. My reflection looked like a stranger, someone who had crossed lines she swore she never would. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to regret it because, for the first time in years, I had felt not comfort, not duty, but something raw, terrifying, and alive. Weeks passed. David came home full of stories and laughter, and life settled into its familiar rhythm. The silence between Ethan and me turned into distance. Became its polite, safe, but hollow. We never spoke of that night again. Sometimes I'd hear his footsteps in the hall and feel my heart race for no reason. Sometimes he'd glance at me during dinner just for a second and look away as if it meant nothing. But we both knew better. We lived inside that secret, carrying it like a ghost between us, invisible to the world, but always there. And even now, months later, when everything looks peaceful again, I can still feel it. The echo of something we never touched, but will never forget. Because some connections aren't meant to be understood. Some loves are born only to be buried, and some desires, no matter how deeply you hide them, find a way to whisper back to you in the quiet hours of the night. I've learned to live with it, to smile, to breathe, to pretend. But sometimes when the house is still and the world outside is sleeping, I close my eyes and wonder if in another life we might have been allowed to love without fear. The thought lingers, dangerous and tender, and then I remind myself some shadows aren't meant to fade. If this story touched something in you, don't let it fade. Leave a comment because sometimes the things we don't say are the ones that connect us the most. Asterisk, asterisk.